Hello, my name is Lilian Okibe. Welcome to my channel. So in today's video, we're going to be talking all about color. I'll be sharing with you guys everything you need to know before you dye your hair or dye your locks, and whether it's a good idea for you to dye your locks. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, then please keep on watching. Now, before you go ahead and dye your locks, I feel like there are certain terms that you must know and kind of understand, right? This is going to help you know what you're getting yourself into, and if you actually decide to dye your locks by yourself, or even if you're going to be going to a professional, these terms will help you understand what it is you're doing and help you get the best of your experience, basically. So the first thing you need to know is that there's different ways that you can dye your hair, right? You can either dye your hair with bleach, or you can dye your hair without bleach. Now, bleach, if you're going to be dyeing your hair, like if you are going to be dyeing your hair a lighter color, let's say you want your hair, let's say you have black hair, or like you have dark brown hair and you want to go blonde, or you want to go like gingers or red or something like that, there's a high chance that you're going to need to use bleach in order to achieve that color. What bleach does is that it basically lifts off the melanin in your hair. So let's say you're starting, like you've never dyed your hair before, so what bleach does is that it removes like the pigments and like the melanin in your hair to give you like a light canvas, so that whatever color you put into your hair will show. Because if you do not bleach your hair first, if you put any light color of dye in your hair, if on black hair or on like dark hair, it will not show. You know, so that's why you need to first understand what color you're going for. Do you want to go lighter than the color that you already have? If you're going to be going lighter, there's a high chance that you're going to need to bleach your hair. If you do not bleach your hair, whatever color you put into your hair will not show. Like, or the best case scenario is that you're going to have your hair looking dull. Like, I don't know how many of you guys have seen people that go ahead and dye their hair, and let's say they dye their hair brown and they end up with kind of like black hair that looks dirty. I don't know if that makes sense. That is a high chance that the person went ahead to dye their hair without bleaching it first. So there's whenever you see any like deep, rich colored hair that was dyed, know that bleach was used to achieve that color. Like, you cannot get rich color, right, using dye without first bleaching your hair. After understanding what bleach is, next thing you want to know is developer, right? For most dyes, you're going to have the dye cream, and then along with the dye is going to come what we call developer. Now, even if you're going to be bleaching your hair, you're going to need to put developer in your bleach for it to work, right? And also, for if you're going to be using permanent dye, you're going to need to put the developer with your permanent dye for it to work. Now, developer is actually a harsh chemical, and bleach is also a harsh chemical. Like, if you do not know what you're getting yourself into, if you put too much bleach, or like you leave it in your hair for too long, or use developer and you use it wrongly, you may end up like really damaging your hair, or your hair can completely fall out. The kinds of developers that you're going to see are usually 4 types. That's the 10, the 20, the 30, the 40. Now that we talked about bleach and developer, let's go ahead and talk about the actual hair dye. There are different types of hair dyes that are in the market. We're going to be talking about 3 types. There are 3 major kinds of hair dyes that you're going to find in the market. We have the semi-permanent dye, we have the demi-permanent dye, and then we have the permanent dye. Now, for the semi-permanent dye, this is not as invasive as the rest of the dyes. This is the least invasive dye that you're going to find in the market. This doesn't really penetrate the hair as much. Now, for each hair strand, the hair strand is made up of like basically 3 layers. You have the cuticle, the cortex, and the medulla, right? The semi-permanent dye doesn't really penetrate into the cortex, right? It just sits on, you know, the cuticle. It doesn't really penetrate into the cortex. And the thing about semi-permanent dye is that it doesn't last at all. Like, after about 4 washes, it's going to wash away, right? So it's not something that lasts for a very long time. However, it is the least harsh of all the dyes that you're going to see, because it is not as invasive. But the thing is, the fact that you go ahead and use semi-permanent dye doesn't mean that you're not going to have any issues along the line, because the thing about semi-permanent dye is, even though it is not as invasive, and even though after like a few washes it's going to like wash out, you may still have a little bit of stain in your hair. Like what I mean by that is that your hair is not just going to go back to like exactly how it was before you dyed your hair after it has washed out. Like depending on the color of your hair, it may take a while, or that hair may even have to grow out before like your hair is going to go back to its original like sheen and shine and shade. Because even if, for example, let's say you use a semi-permanent black dye now, for example, and you have black hair but you just want your hair to be darker, the thing is that your hair, despite the fact that your hair may not be as black as the dye, your hair naturally has its sheen and shine. And when you go ahead and put dye, even if it's semi-permanent dye on your hair, it kind of like covers the natural sheen and shine of your hair, right? So even after the dye washes out, it's still going to have that layer of stain. It's like kind of like putting, let's say you put dye on your clothes, for example. Even though if you go ahead and wash the clothes, it may remove most of the dye, but there's a high chance that you're still going to have a little bit of stain of that particular dye on that clothes, especially if the clothes is like of a lighter shade. I don't know if that makes sense. So you're still going to have that stain in your hair even after it washes out. So for you to have that vibrant, rich color, you're going to need to maintain the dye, or stand the chance of having your hair looking dull, even if you want to go back to like not dyeing your hair at all. Now the second kind of dye that you're going to see in the market are demi-permanent dyes. Demi-permanent dyes are a lot milder than the permanent dyes. They are not as invasive as the permanent dyes, but they are more invasive than the semi-permanent dyes. Semi-permanent dyes penetrate a little bit into the cuticle. It penetrates into the cuticle, right, and maybe a little bit into the cortex, but basically it actually penetrates the cuticle of the hair. So this actually lasts longer than the semi-permanent dye. But the thing is, it doesn't last like forever, right? After about 12 washes, it may also start to fade away. I feel like this is the dye that many people use when they are trying to get a hang of like playing with dye, playing with hair color and things like that, and they just want to see how they like it and stuff, but they want it to like wash out eventually, but they don't want it to wash out as quickly as semi-permanent dye. People tend to go for the demi-permanent dye. Another thing that people use demi-permanent dye for is they use it to tone hair. So let's say you've gone ahead to bleach your hair, right? To make your hair, bleach basically removes all the pigment from your hair. So when you bleach your hair, it just makes it lighter, right? So the longer you leave the bleach in and the more you bleach your hair, the lighter your hair is going to become, right? So it basically removes the pigment from your hair. It removes the melanin from your hair. That's basically what bleach does. So what many people do with the demi-permanent dye is after they have bleached their hair, they go ahead and use the demi-permanent dye to tone their hair into like the shade that they want. Another thing is they go ahead and just use the demi-permanent dye to just, you know, put on the color that they want on their bleached hair, right? But demi-permanent dyes are not as invasive and they are milder. Now the thing about semi-permanent dyes is that you do not need a developer for them. Like you don't need to use developers for semi-permanent dyes, and that's why they are a lot more gentle on the hair than permanent dyes, but it do not last as long as permanent dyes. Now the final kind of dye that you're going to see in the market, this is like the strongest of the strongest, is the permanent dye. Now the permanent dyes are permanent. You know, the color actually penetrates into the cortex of the hair, and as soon as you dye your hair the permanent dye, like just like the name implies, it is permanent. Even though some parts of the color may kind of wash away a little bit, but it is dyed. Like your hair will remain that color. The worst case scenario is that the color just kind of like fades away, but it remains that color. It doesn't wash out completely, and it just remains that way, except you go ahead and bleach your hair again to remove that color, or you use a color remover. Color remover is another term I should use. Color remover is basically a formula that is used to strip out, like if you have colored your hair before but now you want a different color, right, so that maybe lighter, and obviously if you put lighter color on hair that is dark, it is not going to take. So if you want to go from a darker color to, let's say you dyed your hair like deep red and now you want to go blonde, like honey blonde, you're going to have to lift off the color, the deep red, so that the honey blonde is going to take in the hair. I don't know if that makes sense. So you may end up using a bleach, or you may use a what is it called, a color remover, right? So a permanent dye, you cannot, the dye in permanent dye, the color in permanent dye is permanent, like the color penetrates into the cortex of your hair such that the color is permanent except you bleach it, or the only way you can remove the color is if you bleach it, or you go ahead and use a color remover. So those are all the terms that you need to understand. Now for the permanent dye, you're going to need a developer. Like, it doesn't work alone, you're going to need a developer. Now, like I said earlier, developer is like a harsh chemical. The higher you go, the stronger it is. Like I said, you have developer in 10, 20, 30, 40. I think it's called volume 10, volume 20, volume 30, volume 40. You can actually go higher, but you are most likely not going to find those like higher values of like 50 and beyond in this, like if you go to like a supermarket or anything like that, because those ones are very, very harsh and very dangerous. Like, they are so dangerous that if you mistakenly touch the developer, like, it can actually burn you, right? So developers are basically harsh chemicals, and so that's why permanent dyes are a lot harsher than semi-permanent and demi-permanent dyes, because obviously you're going to need a developer for them. So those are like the basics. Those are the basic things that you need to know about hair dye if you're going to dye your hair. Now, generally speaking, dyeing your hair alters the structure of your hair, and so it damages your hair, even if it's just a little bit. Now, one of the reasons why dyeing your hair can damage your hair is when you use bleach in your hair. Like, if you use bleach, the more bleach you use, the higher your chances of damaging your hair, because what bleach does is it removes the melanin in your hair. And the melanin in our hair is what is responsible for like the pigment or like the color of our hair. We all have melanin in our hair, no matter what color you have, right? The lighter your hair color, the less melanin you have, but basically we all have melanin in our hair. And the role that melanin plays is that melanin actually helps to protect your hair from the elements. It helps to protect your hair from the sun, the harsh UV rays of the sun and things like that, and it generally helps to keep your hair healthy. The melanin is not just responsible for the color, it also helps to keep your hair healthy. So when you go ahead and remove the melanin from your hair, even if you go ahead and put like a darker color in, right, the fact that melanin is removed, your hair is now vulnerable to the harsh UV rays of the sun and to damage generally, and your hair is going to be more prone to drying out. And that's why using bleach in your hair can actually be very, very damaging. The fact that you have removed the melanin from your hair, you have already damaged your hair in a way, because your hair, the integrity of your hair has dropped, because now the protective effect of melanin is no longer there, because you no longer have melanin in your hair. Now, the lighter you go when you bleach your hair, the less melanin you have, obviously, and so the higher chances of, the higher the damage that you have done to your hair, basically. So if you bleach your hair, obviously you're going to, your risk of damaging your hair is a lot higher. Now, another thing is, if you use permanent dyes that needs a developer, the chances of damaging your hair is also higher, because those developers are very harsh chemicals. They are so harsh that they can burn you, right? The higher you go, the more harmful they are. So if you're going to be using any form of dye where you're going to be using a developer, just know that you have tampered with the structure of your hair, and so you have damaged your hair in a way, right? So the best dye to use for your hair is the semi-permanent dye or the demi-permanent. The best dye to use, if at all you're going to use a dye, is semi-permanent dye, but semi-permanent dyes do not last long. And another thing is, if you are using dye such that you want your hair to get lighter, and you use a semi-permanent dye alone without bleach, or use a demi-permanent dye alone without bleach, like, it's not going to be doing anything to your hair. Like, yeah, just the best case scenario is you're going to have like a kind of like a tint, slight tint when you expose your hair to a lot of light or like to the sun. That's the best case scenario. But you see that rich vibrant color that you see on Instagram, you cannot achieve that except you bleach your hair. You cannot achieve that except you bleach your hair. So and the closest you can get to even achieving that, like if your hair is virgin hair, you may be able to get away with 1 or 2 shades higher than the shade that you already have. Like, let's say you have never dyed your hair before, right? and you may be able to achieve your hair getting 1 to 2 shades lighter if you use permanent dye with a developer, right? You can achieve that, but that will even not still give you the like rich, vibrant color that we see on Instagram. So if you want to achieve that rich, vibrant color that we see on Instagram, you're going to need to bleach your hair, and bleaching your hair automatically damages your hair. Now you may be able to get away with the bleach for a few years, right? Because if you take good care of your hair, you moisturize properly, make sure your hair is always, you know, juicy and moisturized and everything, you may be able to get away with it. But eventually your hair, the bleaching of your hair will give way, except you continuously like cut and cut and cut. And the fact that you're cutting your hair obviously will mean that your hair is not going to be growing as fast, because as it's growing you're going to be cutting it. So generally speaking, bleaching your hair will damage it, whether you like it or not. Right? The best thing you can do after you have bleached your hair is to keep it moisturized and everything like that. Even at that, like, it will still your hair will still get damaged eventually, just that you're going to slow down the damage and like the breakage that will eventually happen. Now when it comes to dyeing locks, it is a little bit more tricky, because the thing about locks is, locks, unlike loose natural hair or like loose hair in general, you have your hair, different strands of hair, right? And those strands of hair, when you apply dye, like the dye goes straight to the strand and starts working, right? But the thing about locks is that each lock is like a group of strands of hair like connected together. So what happens is, when you go ahead and slap your dye or like your bleach or whatever on the surface of your locks, you're going to work it in so that the dye penetrates into the lock, so that it will work like even into the strands of the hair in the locks, right? For it to work. Now the downside to this is, when you're washing out the dye or like the bleach or whatever, there is a high chance that you may not be able to get rid of all the dye from your hair. Like, there is a very, very high chance, because you can't really see inside the lock, even though you're going to try to squeeze and squeeze and squeeze and everything like that, but you cannot really see inside the lock. So after you have put the dye, you may go ahead and wash it out, but you may still have like some traces of dye or bleach in the core of your locks. And what does that do? The fact that you have not gotten rid of all the dye, the bleach or the dye or whatever that you have put in your hair will remain in your hair and continue to eat up your hair. So what happens is, after a while, you may not notice it immediately, right? You may not notice it immediately, but over time that dye continues to eat into the strands of your hair that are like within the core of your locks. You continue to eat, and over time, all of a sudden, it's like your locks are like disintegrating, and you're just wondering like, what's going on? And before you know it, it's like you start to experience breakage on those areas that you have dyed. You know, so dyeing locks is very, very tricky, and that's why it is not actually the best idea for you to just go ahead and buy your box dye and do it yourself at home without really knowing what you're getting yourself into. Because yes, you may go ahead and do whatever you want to do, and it may look like it is fine, but, and the funny thing about locks is, sometimes, because locks are like strong, and apart from the fact that they are strong, like you have a group of strands connected together, when you damage your hair, it may take a while before you start to notice. Like most times when you start to notice damage in your locks, the deed has been done. There's basically nothing you can do about it, because the damage has been accumulating for a while and you did not even know. You know, so that's why dyeing locks is a bit tricky. And if you go ahead and dye your locks, just know that you risk eventually breaking the locks. You stand the chance of disintegrating your locks from the core, because no matter how much you squeeze and squeeze and squeeze, getting rid of all the dye may not actually be that easy, especially if your locks are thick. Like if the individual locks, like if your locks are not very small. If you have micro locks, then this thing that I'm talking about may not be as bad, because your locks are so small, they are almost like loose natural hair. So it's easy for things to get in and for things to get out, and you can easily see if you still have like all those maybe bleach or dye in your locks, right? But the bigger your locks, the higher your chances of damaging your locks when you dye it, because you are most likely not going to be able to get rid of all the things that have entered. Because the thing about locks is, it's very easy for you to drink things, right? But to bring it out, that can be a problem. So dyeing your locks is very risky, and so I feel like you need to know this. And personally, I would say that before you go ahead and dye your locks, know what you're getting yourself into. And if I would want to give my own recommendation, I'll say before you, if you know that you want to have dyed locks, you know, you want to dye your locks, it is better for you to dye your locks before. It's better for you to dye your locks before you go ahead and lock your hair. So let's say, okay, you want your locks to be a certain color. It's better for you to dye your locks, dye your natural hair, maintain that natural hair for a while, right? Maintain that natural hair for a while. Master how to, you know, manage your dyed natural hair for like a few months, maybe like 3, 4, 6 months before you go ahead and lock your hair. That way you have done like the the bottom line of what you need to do, right? And then when you go ahead and lock your hair, what you are going to be doing is maintaining the roots. Now the thing about the roots is the root of your hair is basically loose natural hair, so maintaining the roots may not be as difficult because it is loose natural hair, so you can easily rinse it out and things like that. Of which, while you are rinsing out the roots, you may still have some of the dye that still seeps into the length of your locks without you knowing, and eventually damage it along the line, you know. So dyeing your locks is very, very tricky. For me, I'll say that if at all you even want to dye your locks, just like maybe pick the ends and dye the ends and just have like the ombre look and the ombre effect. That's so that when the locks start to disintegrate, you know that it's just the ends and you can just easily cut it off and you still have most of your hair. Other than, I feel like that is a lot more safer than going ahead to dye all your hair and then maybe after a year or like 2 years, like you have gone ahead to damage your hair and you feel so bad, and now you have to lose a lot of length, right? Now another question that I get a lot from you guys is, can I dye my hair? Let's say I bleach my hair and then I dye it and I go like blonde. Can I, and I notice that I'm damaging my hair, can I go ahead and like dye my hair back to black and everything will be fine? No, you cannot. All what you're going to be doing is you're just going to be hiding the damage, because let's face it, black hair generally looks healthier than blonde hair. Like, let me put it this way, when your hair is damaged, right, it is easier for you to see it when the color is like a bright color than for you to see it when it's black. The thing about black is black hides a lot of bad things. Like black hides a lot, right? So if you dye your locks a bright color and then you notice that it is getting damaged and then you go ahead and dye it black, yes, it may look like you have fixed the problem because the damage will no longer be as obvious, right? But what you have done is you have just you're only hiding the damage. The damage is still there, and eventually your hair is still going to give way, right? So dyeing locks is tricky. It's tricky. Before you know it, know what you're getting yourself into. Know that in about a year or 2 years or 3 years, you may start to reap the damage of dyeing your locks. So know what you're getting yourself into. And even if sometimes, even when you go to a professional, because dyes generally are like very harsh and are very damaging to the hair, they are almost like relaxers, you know. So like there's really nothing you can do about the damage. Like eventually it will show. It's just a matter of trying to hold on to the color and trying to, you know, hold on to the hair as long as possible without the damage showing. But eventually the damage will show. I have seen it over and over and over again. Several people will dye their hair, even with loose naturals. Several people will dye their hair and they're like, oh, like my hair still looks good, there's no damage, everything is fine. And like, oh, this person escaped. Just give them a few years. Just give them like 2 years or like 3 years. Eventually the damage always shows. Like, it's like you really cannot escape it, right? The only thing you can do is, if you're someone that you don't mind, like you really are not interested in having your hair grow longer than a certain length, so what you can do is, as you keep dyeing your hair, you know, you keep trimming it to maintain a certain length, so that as it remains on your head and eventually damage starts to show, you go ahead and cut it. As it remains on your head, you go ahead and cut it. That way it's going to look like, oh, this person is dyeing their hair and everything is fine. But that's not the case. They are continuously trimming and cutting out the damage such that it looks like their hair is not being damaged, but eventually their hair is actually being damaged. It's just that the roots have not gone through a lot of the processing, but the ends, they keep cutting it and trimming it. And that's why you see many people who have dyed locks, And many people who have dyed natural hair, sometimes it seems like their hair looks healthy. I know it's like, oh, this person has healthy dyed hair, but it's like their hair is not growing past a certain length, you know, and that's because their hair is actually going through the damage. But because they are constantly cutting and trimming, it may not be as obvious, right? At the end of the day, it all depends on you. I feel like I may decide to dye my hair sometime in the future, you know, because I actually like color. I mean, decide to dye my hair like red, you know, deep red or anything or something like that, because I like color, right? But I'm not just ready for the damage yet, right? So I feel like there's, at the end of the day, is your hair. You can do with it whatever you want to do, but just know what you're getting yourself into. Don't go into it blindly and think that you are the exception to the rule. Oh, I'm going to do this and do this and do this, and my hair is going to be fine. It's a lie. It is a lie. If you dye your hair, eventually the damage will show. It may take a few years, but eventually you will see the damage, whether you like it or not. So just know that that is what will happen, and prepare accordingly, and prepare your mind so that when it happens, you don't end up being sad and being disappointed or anything like that. So yeah, with that, we'll come to the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if this is your first time on my channel and you'd like to see more videos from me, you'd like to see how my locks progress, then definitely subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. See you guys in my next video.